Hola, Cules. We're back with another episode of Offside. We've been obviously publishing our audio podcast on Spotify and Apple, where we are taking questions from Barca fans and giving our points of view and opinion. In our last episode, we touched upon some of the challenges that our midfield was facing and why it wasn't functioning the way we thought it would, even though on paper we have really got a stacked midfield. In this episode, we're going to talk about our forward line. We found it very hard to score goals. It's been blunt.
Whenever Barca played, teams knew what they were getting into, right? They knew that Barca teams in the past would have difference makers that could always hurt you and always do damage, regardless of the game state, of the conditions, of the state of the squad, anything. And there is no escaping the fact that nowadays this modern Barca team is not exactly built that way. They're not really this force to be reckoned with at all times. This is why this is not working.
All right. So we start with the most basic of functions of the forward line, scoring goals. And this is just for La Liga, just for this season. And you can see the 5 players that have chosen: Lewandowski, Felix, Rafinha, Ferran Torres, and Lamine Yamal. No surprises. Lewandowski, even with all his shortcomings, all the frustration that the fan base has on him, still is our high scorer at 7 goals. We have Felix with 1 goal. We have Rafinha with 2. We have Ferran Torres with 3, and Lamine Yamal with 1. The rest has come from the rest of the team, but this is what the people who have been hired for that job, this is their output.
It's pretty obvious that this number is not as high as it should be. And that goes for every striker that we have in the team. Of course, context also matters, and it's not just the goals that some of them provide, it's more than just that. And some of the without output or just the contribution cannot really be seen in the stats at all times. So some of these players do things outside of just this output. That being said, if you're Barcelona, if you have elite aspirations, and your strike force can only output 14 goals in about 14 games, there might be a problem there, right? Because either you must be winning all those games 1-0, as we know that we have done in the previous seasons, or just your defensive record needs to be intact. It needs to be inch perfect for this to be enough. And as we know, it is not. For Barca, it's currently not. So the goal scoring is just not there. And at the same time, we're not really providing defensive structure, defensive stability that we need for such a low output. And this is a problem because if your main striker, a Barcelona number 9, is scoring 7 goals in 14 games, then you have a big problem. You have a big problem because those goals, if they're not coming from the forward line, we discussed this when we talked about Roque in one of the podcasts. If the goals are not coming from your forward line, you need to compensate somehow, right? You need to have other sources of goal scoring in the team. And do we have that? I don't think so. But it also might be why Xavi is trying to push Pedri and his midfielders into more of an attacking and goal scoring role to compensate for this forward line being lacking in output. So maybe that's the necessity behind those roles that we might not agree with when it comes to our midfielders. But on the face of it, the strike force, the forward line, it's not enough.
And honestly, what worries me is a contribution from players like Felix, Rafinha, Ferran Torres, a lot of money riding on them. And it's not always about the money, but for the price that was given, for the expectation that the team had around, I think the output is just not there. And whether it's all a system issue, I just don't think Barcelona has an elite strike force as of this moment. So let's look into assists, right? And here too, it's surprising, but Lewandowski leads the chart among the forward line. Obviously, there are the midfielders who are involved, but that I've not taken into consideration here. But it was surprising to see that Lewandowski leads the line even here. I would have expected Rafinha and Felix to have higher numbers. But look at the assist creation from Ferran Torres. Look at the assist creation from Rafinha. And look at the actual assist creation from Felix. Now, we have to keep in mind, Rafinha hasn't played that much. He was injured for a while, and his form has been iffy, so he hasn't really played. One has to take that into consideration. But Ferran's got chances. Ferran scored 3 goals, for sure. But his 3 goals without any assists helps us in our quest. That's questionable. Goals and assists along together, if you say GA or XGA, Lewandowski says 10 for the season.
He does have most goals and assist contribution for this team. So he does do the lion's share, as you said. So there is no escaping that fact, despite his struggles. But what is worrying, what you've pointed out as well, is that our main creators are not really creating, right? But then on the other hand, who are they creating for? That's also the question. So who are the players that are meant to be scoring the goals? So these players should be assisting each other, essentially, right? Because we do have the creators, but we also have the forwards here, and it's just not clicking, right? It's just not working the way it's meant to be working. Because Rafinha being your creative winger, he has 1 assist. Okay, we should look at the more detailed data, the more data that's more advanced, maybe to see, okay, is there an issue there, or is it just the output that's missing? Lamine Yamal, okay, you can't really expect him to set the world on fire because we have to dose him, we have to be very careful with him, but there is potential there for sure. Now, Felix, of course, he does a lot more than just, the pure numbers suggest, but at the same time, if this is the marquee player that you have in your forward line, someone that you would potentially be willing to splash a lot of cash on, there needs to be more, right? We discussed this with midfield as well because we have players there who are tasked with creation, but the data doesn't really match that expectation of creation that we have with them. And it's the same thing with the forward line. If you have someone like Felix and Rafinha as your undisputed players, then you need more of these players for sure.
And this is where I would also point out a particular person's name who's no longer playing with us, Ousmane Dembele. He was the winger last season or the last 2 seasons, and if I'm not wrong, close to about 11 to 14 assists in each season. And that shows the impact that a winger could have had. For all of Usman's frustrating play, for all the frustration we had with him as a Barcelona player, you can see from the numbers where we are missing him, where things are lacking. I'm not saying that he was perfect. I'm not saying that he was the answer. But in this broken team, for the way we played, he was the genuine attacking threat. And we have not been able to replace that in the right way. And that's worrying because unless you have those difference makers, you can keep doing tactical permutations and combinations in the field. But if you don't have attacking players who can take the game and who can create that moment of magic, we're not going to win games. Okay, moving on to goals plus assists. And this is how the charts looks. So when it comes to goals plus assists, Felix Rafinha and Ferran Torres are similar, right? Lewandowski obviously riding the charts, and Lamine Yamal is at 2. 21 goals and assists together combined across our strike force and wingers, right? Is that enough for Barca to be a title-winning team, to strike fear into the hearts of opponents, to be Champions League worthy? I don't think so. I know we spend a lot of time on our midfield and our pivot and many other questions, but I think fundamentally what we don't have is a forward line which is required for an elite team.
I agree. And I think the game against Porto was the clear example of how much it actually means for a team to have a difference maker on the pitch. Cancelo was that in that game. He's not necessarily that every single game, which we discussed as well, which could be another issue. But just having that player who can single-handedly win you the game, that's invaluable. And yes, you're right. 21 goals across your forward line. So far in this season, it just isn't enough. The only scenario in which this is enough is if the rest of the team compensates for that. So you have goals coming from midfield, from defense, that kind of compensate for the lack of output in the forward line. That's one scenario. The other scenario, which we also discussed, is if you score 21 goals, but you concede less than half of that, right? In that scenario, it can work. But on the face of it, 21 goals for a team with elite aspirations across all competitions would be difficult to sustain, I think. So last season's defensive record wasn't a fluke because you don't do a 38 game flukes, right? So you don't do that. But at the same time, it was never going to be sustainable. And now we're seeing that now. We're seeing the regression now.
So somehow we are managing Band-Aid as usual, but the point remains that with this strike force, if we have major illusions about winning a lot of silverware, then we are frankly deluded as a fan base. All right, let's keep going on. Now we're going to do it at a XG per 90, and per 90 obviously takes into account how much time each one has played. So the graph will change. And this does show certain insights. Whether we can use them or not, that's debatable, and we'll come to that. But Lewandowski is still, again, XG per 90, 0.74. Rafinha, however, is much higher. So when he does play, his output is next to Lewandowski, it would seem, but he's not playing that much. And when he does play, it's very frustrating because he loses balls. It's just messy at times to see him out there. He has a lot of potential, but that has not really been unlocked within this system. And I don't think within this system it will be in any time in the future. Now, if you look into Felix, Ferran Torres, and Lamine Yamal, again, per 90, there's not much that you can expect from them consistently in every game. It would mean probably about they'll probably produce something every third game or every fourth game. That's when you can expect something from them. And that's just truly not good enough for the stakes at this level.
Yeah, it's basically the same story as the previous graph. You can see that trend here. And it's interesting that Rafinha is next to Lewandowski. And it's an encouraging sign because he is meant to be the creator. I would still feel that his main weapon would be the creation and distribution from the right side of the pitch. But we also know that he has that ball striking. He can actually threaten the goal from distance, which is very useful because Barca often face those stubborn deep blocks, and having someone like Rafinha is always a good weapon to have to unlock those blocks. So yes, there is value in there, absolutely, and it's nice to see that. It's just it's still not translating to enough, which is the problem. With Felix, Ferran Torres, and Yamal, yeah, it's all quite similar, all around the same number. But again, I would say that these numbers, this data, we have to use it wisely. We have to take into account that there's more to it than just this number. There's the whole context that needs to be taken into account and the roles that these players have. And if there is value beyond XG, for example. But we're not exactly seeing that either because obviously Barca are not seeing the output that they should be seeing. So on the face of it, again, similar story. Lewandowski is the one that gets into most chances. Does he take them? More often than not, this season that hasn't been the case because 0.74 is not necessarily a bad output, but it's not translating to enough at the moment.
Okay, let's keep going. I just want to make a small caveat. XAG is just assisted goals, or sometimes we call it XA, but in Opta, that's how they define it. So that's why I've taken XAG per 90. But basically, what it means is assist per 90. And that's again where you see Rafinha's numbers are higher, which means when he does play, he doesn't play that much, but when he does play, the probability of him creating an assist is highest among our forward line. Now, that does create a conundrum because the eye test would say that Lamine Yamal is a better, more attacking player than Rafinha in that position, right? How do you not play him? And when you do play Rafinha, it doesn't really translate back into actual results. But that's what the data says. And that's why data and eye test need to go together hand in hand. But if you look into all the others, there's not a lot there in terms of assist creation that's happening from the forward line, which means, all the third man runs, all the making of space, playing off the shoulder, creating that opportunity within that box. None of that is happening in that forward line, right? Now, is it all because of Xavi and because he can't coach, which is the popular commentary out there? I probably don't think so, that it can be all due to that. I think the players also are not delivering or not being able to play at the level that they should be for just being. The players are also not delivering at the level that they should if you consider them as elite players, right? If you consider them as mid-table, fine, that's okay. But if you consider them as elite, I don't think that output is coming through.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's not enough in there. But it's interesting because Rafinha is meant to be leading this chart. He is the elite creator that we supposedly have on the flank, and Felix too. But I keep saying there's more that these guys do that is shown in this data. So keep that in mind with everything that we say. But yes, I'm happy to see Rafinha so high, but it's also the danger of playing so little, right? Okay, I know this is per 90, so that kind of balances out the game time. But at the same time, if he was playing a lot more, chances are that number would probably drop. So that keep that in mind when analyzing these stats, and that's the danger of data that they always needs to be accompanied with context. But yes, again, I don't really have much to add here, Dev, because the problems are very much visible. They're clear. They're clear for us to see. And Barca are struggling in both creation and output. The numbers would suggest that Barca are doing fairly well in terms of creation. But why aren't we scoring more? That's an entirely different problem altogether.
You're right. Our XG has actual cumulative team XG has improved compared to last season, right? So we're creating more, whichever way, through our midfield, a combination of factors, we are creating more, but we aren't really converting them. And I don't think with this forward line, we can do more. The XG plus XAG is just assisted plus expected goals. There's nothing more different. It's just a combination and compilation of the last two stats that we showed. And here again, not surprisingly, Rafinha is scoring high, but again, please be mindful of the time that he has played. The more time he plays, his numbers will go down. Lewandowski, however, still retains his position, and the rest are more or less similar, right? I think the point's clear. Everybody understands it. The eye test confirms it. We don't really have an elite forward line. And that's the situation, and that's what we have to live with, I think, till the end of the season. And we have a Champions League run, and we have La Liga, obviously, where we're not doing that well. Rumor has it that Vitor Roque will come in and join us, and maybe that will provide some sort of a spark, some sort of space, but he's also quite young, untested at the highest level. And even if he comes, I don't think he'll be able to play for the Champions League because he's not been registered for the Champions League when the season started. So he'll probably, his only contribution will be in La Liga, which is also fine, which is not bad. But is one Vitor Roque enough to change this dire situation around? And then the question becomes that, okay, if he comes in, who gets sacrificed? Who sits out in this forward line? And if they're sitting out, does it make sense to think about actually looking for sales and transfer of some of these players in the next transfer window? More on this and some tactical analysis on what we can do to improve the situation that we have, to become a more attacking unit, to become a little bit more feared in our attacking presence. I'll pass it over to Dom. Dom, over to you.
So the way I would like to do this is basically the same as with our midfield, right? We'll go over the realistic lineup, which you can see just now, and then we'll do the lineup in terms of profile. So that will be more of the optimal or idealistic situation based on how the players will gel together, how they would balance out the forward line, how we can get the best out of that forward line. Essentially, we're facing the same problem again. In midfield, we had the discrepancy or the gulf between the quality or who should play, who fits the best, and who is in the best form, and who Xavi's best players are. And this is the same thing. On paper, this realistic lineup is what you would expect in most games, I still feel like. So you have Felix on the left side of the pitch, you have Lewandowski down the middle, and Rafinha on the right side of the pitch. We have seen plenty of rotation. I say plenty. Well, we have seen rotation on the right side where you have Lamine coming in and Rafinha going to the bench, him not being available due to injuries and so on and so forth. So this is debatable, but I still feel in terms of how realistic we're being and considering Lamine's age and how Xavi needs to dose him and protect him, Rafinha will still get the nod or should get the nod, at least on paper, in theory, ahead of Lamine. And I wouldn't say most cases, but in many of those cases. And on paper, these three would work too, but there are some issues. And what I'll do here is I'll go through each of these players and I will show you their zones of influence. Basically, I will show you where they operate, where they like to operate, and how they influence the play in our attacking actions within those zones. Starting with Felix here on the left side of the pitch. Now, people have various different opinions on Felix. Some of those are warranted and they do make sense, but some of those I feel are maybe a bit too harsh. So what I'll do here is I'll create Felix's zone of influence. And basically, this is what Felix likes to do, right? So this is where Felix likes to operate within the opposition side of the pitch. What he will do, he will essentially run into the box, inside the box if he has to be. He will drop just behind the striker where he is very comfortable. He will assist Pedri or whoever this number 10 is, who will just then slot right here. And he will also drop deeper and influence progression and build up from these areas right here. So basically, Felix is a progression tool. He is a chance creation tool, but he's also a goal scoring tool. And that's on paper, right? Because in reality, what we see from data as well, this doesn't always come out the way we would like it to come out. But that's just pure output. And I feel like there's much more that goes on behind the scenes, behind those very superficial data. Let's put it out superficial data. Now Lewandowski, on the other hand, I'll put him on a different color. In theory, he has a very small zone of influence, right? All he has to do is he needs to be in charge of this area right here, and he has a primary role, a singular role, but it's also very important, or maybe the most important role, which is to score goals. But what we are seeing from him is that he wants to, of course, be more involved. He wants to drop deep. He wants to do the link up play. But the problem with this right here, this is realistic because he is the main goal scorer. He still has the most output in the team. That's why this is realistic. But it's not ideal because of his tendencies on and off the ball. When he does drop deep, when he's, I'll just pop him here, when he's in this zone right here, what happens is that he doesn't have the link up necessary, or he doesn't have the touch or the technical quality anymore to sustain this kind of play. But even if he did have that, these profiles next to him, Rafinha and Felix, are not the close runners that he needs to have next to him to operate properly. So Felix and Rafinha can make those runs. So even if Lewandowski was able to send them into space, they're not ideal. They can work there, but they're not ideal in those scenarios, right? The other thing is, if your striker drops deep, he needs to have the legs to then burst back into the box and get at the end of the passes that he or someone else deploys into space into the creators. He doesn't have that at the moment. And that's why in this setup, Lewandowski is not the ideal profile, right? Ideally, he would just sit here and that would work just fine. Finally, I will talk about Rafinha. So now Rafinha is in a tricky situation where he is tasked to be something that he's not comfortable with. So Lewandowski is forcing himself into uncomfortable situations, whereas Rafinha is being forced into uncomfortable situations. So that's the difference here. If we look at Rafinha's zone of influence, it's also pretty broad. He will operate in this zone right here. And due to Barca not really having overlapping presences here and someone who will hold the width, Rafinha is often a touchline winger, which is not ideal because his flaws come to light in this situation quite a lot. What I mean by this is that he has a certain angle bias. He has this one-footedness that really bogs him down. And if he's in this area right here, isolated by design, I want to say, that means that he has to rely on beating his man and then charging into the box and being the creator from this side of the pitch. What he likes to do, and we know this, he likes to go into this zone right here, and then from there, from this half space, he likes to shoot or he likes to create. So what he likes to do is be here, but the system or the structure is forcing him to be here that we see on the screen just now. So this forward line could work on paper, but ideally you have someone who's an elite creator from the wide area here, someone who's a poacher and a box dominator right here, and then this guy right here on the left side has to complement it by having a clear role of either a creator, that can be through disrupting or through dribbling or through just assisting or being this output machine, or being a goal scorer. So you would ideally have two goal scorers or two players with elite movement and one elite creator. In this setup, the way these players play, at the moment, it's not functioning properly.
I don't even know whether we can play 4-3-3 with this forward lineup, honestly, Dom. I think if you look into our midfield problems, our defense issues, and everything else that we have going on within this team, with those three in the forward zone, we also miss out on midfield solidity or tracking or stopping counters that happen. And they also don't contribute to the goal scoring aspect of things. So when you had Messi, Neymar, and Suarez example, and that's an extreme example, yes, they didn't do a lot of defensive work for sure. And the team had to compensate for that. But they more than enough took care of it in the scoring department. So it compensated, Right now, we don't really have those players. So when you have three players who are occupying those three spaces, but not really creating that much, it is contributing to the other factors that we have seen in the team looking disjointed. So I don't think we have the players or the profiles at the form that they're in.
And I will now show you what would be, in terms of profiles, would be the more balanced version. So if I put Lamine here on this side instead of Rafinha, and Lewandowski honestly can work because his profile is very much what we need. He is this box dominator, at least on paper, right? He is this player who can stay here in this box and just dominate this area and put away all and any chances that come his way. Unfortunately, that doesn't always turn out the way we want it to turn out in reality. And that's why people do want Ferran Torres in this role, not because he will score more goals than Lewandowski necessarily, but because his mobility and dynamism offer this team something different, right? So if he drops deeper, he does it differently than Lewandowski. He will drop deeper. Don't get me wrong, because we've seen that at City as well. That's maybe something that the Pep has instilled into him. He will drop deeper, but he will play these quick 1-2 balls into the players that are near him, and then what he will do, he has the legs, he has the movement to quickly go back and reset. He'll be here no matter what. If Lewandowski drops deep, he will often stay there for prolonged periods of time, and that will influence both his goal scoring, but also the team around him because he doesn't really perform that role optimally, right? Now, Lamine on this side is very interesting. He is very similar to Rafinha in terms of his zones of influence, but he's more comfortable being in this wide area right here, or even being in this deeper area right here to link up with his fullback, to his midfield, with his midfielders, and then burst back and be the goal scoring and assisting and creator profile that we need. The numbers don't suggest that he is doing that much in terms of that output, but he is contributing much more because he reads the game better than Rafinha. He knows when to release the ball and how to release it. Not necessarily to create a goal, but just to progress the play and advance the play forward and into those dangerous zones. Felix on the left, I still feel that he needs to play because he just offers you assistance and he offers you something in almost every single phase of attack, right? If Pedri needs assistance here, Felix can be that guy next to him to create a box that Xavi likes, and he can enable Cancelo because this is important. People say Cancelo was our left winger in that game against Porto. He was in a way, but he was also enabled by having an actual winger in terms of in form of Felix ahead of him, who made all this space possible for him in the first place. And he enabled him to be less marked and be in the zones that he likes to be in at all times. So when everything is said and done, I still feel if you have a forward three, because let's face it, Barca will more often than not go with a forward three. This is what you would expect in terms of profiles because you get a nice blend of movement, of link up, of dynamism, but also you get some extra legs in Ferran Torres, who then, when Barca press, for example, they always push one midfielder up. And you have Ferran and someone like Pedri or Gavi, ideally, who offer you some off the ball aspects as well as the on the ball aspects. Now, the problem with this forward line in particular, and with realistically with any forward line that Barca have, is that lack of output, right? So these players function well in terms of profiles on paper. They gel well, they balance your forward line well, but they don't have the goals in them just yet. And that's the problem with that we're facing. And that's why realistically you don't have Ferran here, right? Realistically, you have to have Lewandowski here. And realistically, in many cases, you don't have Lamine here. You have Rafinha here. Because in terms of output, and we've seen in the stats as well, these guys will give you more than the guys that you would optimally, ideally have in there. And that's similar to the midfield, is that the ideal and the realistic and the best quality don't necessarily match up.
Let's say in January, Vitor Roque comes in. Does it make sense that Vitor Roque slots in that center role? You push Ferran to be the right winger. Felix continues as the left winger so that he has the ability to create that box midfield, as you rightly pointed out, and to create some passing overloads. But it also gives opportunity for Cancelo to be much more creative and attacking than what he can be, right? So there's benefits in having them there. But how would Ferran as a right winger perform compared to his is often anonymous, correct? And with Roque taking the middle.
So you mean this, Felix, Roque, and Ferran,
Something
right?
like
That's
that.
mm.
Something like that.
The thing with Ferran on the right side is that we used to see this back before he joined City, right? He was the right winger because back then I feel like Ferran was a very different player. He was more of a dribbler and creator, and I even profiled him as such on the right side. The thing is, he's very right-footed as well, so he naturally gravitates towards the touchline, right? That's what he would do, right? He would be more of a touchline winger, and that suited him before because he was more of a dribbler. He was more of someone who can beat his man and then create for the team. But now he's transitioned into a role that sees him more as this very utility based player who will make the movement to unlock other players and then be in the right positions to score the goals. So he's very much a inverted style of forward or a center forward than he is a creator. That there's no doubt about that. And this right-sided role would just I don't think it would suit him as much. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he could rediscover that nature of him. But I would rather have him either down the middle or on the left side because on the left side he can be much more of a. It wouldn't be Roque here. It would be Lamine. On the left side, he would be much more of that utility player, right? He would be someone who can be closer to the box, and you need Ferran close to the box and making movement that unlocks other players. On the right, I don't feel that gets used or maximized as much.
You'll
What
drop Felix, you'll keep Ferran on the left, and then you'll keep a center forward in the middle.
like Roque down the middle, like
Someone,
this,
Roque
or
or
Lewandowski. This would work as well because then you would have someone with the movement, someone who will be in the box, a lead goal scorer down the middle, and a creator down the right. That would work. That would be a good balance of profiles in my mind. I've also been dabbling with the option of having Roque in this role because Roque is similar to Ferran Torres in the way he moves, the way he exploits space, but he's on paper at least back in Brazil, he's much more of a proficient goal scorer. So you get a Ferran with more goals in this role and similar movement, similar utility. And now all of a sudden you put a creator here. It can be Lamine, it can be Rafinha, and on paper you have a much more output-based forward line with similar dynamics, right? But Lewandowski needs to be what he's meant to be, right, in this role. So if you have someone like Felix here, for example, I would love to try this out as well because he can do this. He can be this up and down type of player who influences deep positions, but then runs back forward. And on paper, at least, he has the ball striking, the lethality, which we haven't unfortunately seen as of yet, but he has it in him. And if that can be exploited, you would have a very good forward line. You can also put Ferran here as well. But the thing is, you need goals from this position, right? You need someone who can confidently and sustainably, reliably score goals, which unfortunately at the moment is a scarce thing at Barcelona.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not, I don't think Ferran has nailed down his spot. He's got a lot of great attributes. He's a great player, but just what we have seen over the last 2 years, I think it has been a little bit underwhelming, and I don't know whether that's going to change anytime in the future. Having said so, however, the Valencia Ferran, the winger Ferran, is where I think I saw the best version of Ferran. So I often wonder whether going back to that route can unlock the player that we all thought he could be.
We can experiment with a lot of things, right? This forward line doesn't have that many options, but you have players who can be played in multiple roles, right? I would like to see Felix down the middle at one point. I still think there's potential in that to be used or maximized. And then you have someone like Ferran on the left, for example, who can make the movement that you need from that side. On the face of it, you have a forward line that has a lot of versatility, a forward line that can be put in many different positions and roles, but end of the day, they don't have as many goals in them at the moment that we need to have. So that's at the core of the problems, and that needs to be addressed, whether through maximizing their profiles or just the injection of quality.
You know my point of view on this. I've often said this before. I don't think this is a forward line that can threaten. I don't think we are winning a lot of titles with this forward line. I know we need a defensive six, but even before that, I think we need a forward line. I think we need goal scorers. And I think we need to spend more time on squad planning. With that, Visca Al Barca, and see you on the next one.